Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the fourth edition of the ASSI Video Journal. This time around, we've got Dr. Mihir Bapat, the Director of Spine Surgery at the Nanavati Hospital in Bombay. Dr. Bapat is famous for his work on the craniovertebral junction, and today, in fact, he is going to review some of the papers in literature which has affected his practice around the craniovertebral junction the most. So I'm sure you are going to have a great time listening to this analysis. And without much ado, let me take you on to his presentation. Thank you.
I welcome you all to this journal club on irreducible atlantoaxial instability. I'm Dr. Mihir Bapat from Nanavati Hospital, Mumbai. Irreducibility in the craniocervical junction is decided on three factors. Most of them are preoperative: flexion extension views, preoperative traction, and traction under general anesthesia just before the surgery. The factors that decide irreducibility in a C1-C2 joint depends upon the etiology, the duration of the pathology, and morphology of the C1-C2 joint at the time of presentation. Most of the irreducible dislocations are congenital because there is sufficient time for these dislocations to become stiff. The other common etiologies are trauma, infections, and rheumatoid arthritis. So when we look at a model of C1-C2 destruction, it can be rapid because of trauma, infection, or rheumatoid arthritis. The C1-C2 joint gets progressively destroyed. First, there is an atlantoaxial instability, and then there is a vertical migration of the dens. The occiput abuts against the C2, the disease heals, and then there is a progressive contracture which results in stiffness and irreducibility. So the C1 acts as a spacer between the occipital condyle and the C2. When the C1 becomes abnormal, there is a progressive craniocervical kyphosis. The C2 starts migrating upwards. Now this creates an acute angle in the cervicomedullary junction, which threatens the neurology. As the C2 keeps slipping forwards, the dens will then abut against the occiput, and it forms a pseudo joint between the pars of the C2 and the occipital bone. Progressive contracture and readjustment of the soft tissues will make this dislocation more and more difficult to reduce over a period of time. So the treatment protocols in the past used to be for stiff dislocations, a period of traction. If found to be irreducible, then posterior decompression and stabilization. This procedure is now more or less anecdotal. The other common protocol was to do a transoral odontoid resection and then same stage posterior stabilization to deal with complex deformities. This whole concept of irreducibility has been changed by the pioneering work of three gentlemen: Professor Atul Goel, Professor Sarat Chandra, and Professor Wong from China. So let us look at what Dr. Goel had to say. Professor Goel is the head of Department of Neurosurgery at the King Edward Memorial Hospital. He has more than 100 to 200 publications on the craniocervical junction and is most known for his joint distraction technique, and has completely abolished the concept of irreducibility of the craniovertebral junction. In this paper, he has numerous publications. His concepts kept on evolving as the publications evolved. In this particular publication that was in the Journal of Neurosurgery in 2005, there were 24 cases, congenital and traumatic. The mean follow-up was about 9 to 6 years, and the average age was 22 years. So what Dr. Atul Goel says is that the whole concept of irreducibility is based on the fixation of the C1-C2 joint. So if it is possible to distract the C1-C2 joint and push the occiput upwards, the dens will be pulled out of the foramen magnum. He then devised special spacers which could be wedged and jammed into the joint, and hence the joint jamming technique. These spacers could be compressed with the C1 screws and the C2 screws. However, he used almost in all his cases a customized patented plate. So this was very effective in reducing the vertical basilar invagination. However, a certain proportion of his cases were not reduced in the horizontal plane. Now, there are certain points which changed over a period of time. The screws were replaced with reduction screws, and then you had rods which could pull back the horizontal dislocation. In all his cases, he had resected the C2 ganglion, and this gave a panoramic view of the C1 C2 joint, and it was easily possible to distract the C1 C2 joint. He did not report any significant C2 neuromas, and he said that there is a certain degree of hypoesthesia in the C2 dermatome, but the patients do not complain about. The meticulous hemostasis of the plexus of veins around the C2 ganglion is of utmost importance because this can cause torrential bleed. So when you use a reduction screw, you can actually achieve an intraoperative joint manipulation and reduction of the atlantoaxial complex. So as the cases became more and more severe, as the craniocervical kyphosis started increasing, however, this particular paper did not mention as to where to put the screws if the C1 lateral mass is vertical in nature. In a large proportion of his cases, the screws are placed through the C1 into the occipital condyle. All of us are aware that most of these cases have an occipitalized C1 mass, and therefore you can use the whole mass of the occiput and the C1 for fixation. So there are no clear contraindications that have been mentioned in this paper. Almost all varieties of cases have been included, and a fair amount of reduction has been achieved in most that we'll discuss later. The contraindications to this procedure are still not known. The second gentleman who really researched the C1 C2 complex and gave us in details the pathoanatomy of the basilar invagination, detailing the steps of joint manipulation. And in fact, he patented a device where you can vertically reduce as well as extend the C1 C2 complex to give a wonderful reduction. This gentleman is Professor Charat Chandra, Department of Neurosurgery from AIIMS. So in this paper of 79 cases, he included only congenital pathologies with an occipitalized C1 arch. Now, what Charat Chandra had to say was that as the craniocervical kyphosis increases, the C1 starts tilting forward, and the joint inclination angle between the long axis of the odontoid, which is in the sagittal plane, and the lateral mass, which is in the lateral plane. So when you impose the odontoid onto the lateral mass, the inclination of the C1 gives you a joint inclination angle. And this angle keeps on increasing as the craniocervical kyphosis keeps increasing. So whenever this angle is less than 160 degrees, that means it is possible to go over the top of the C2 into the true C1 C2 joint. You can drill the C1 C2 joint. The same has been emphasized by Dr. Goel. You can distract this joint, and you can put a spacer in the C1 C2 joint, which is a true joint remodeling technique, or the JRM technique. Most of his cases belong to this technique. As the C1 inclination becomes more and more steep and the C1 starts disappearing in front of the C2, as discussed previously, the pars will start abutting against the occipital bone. This forms a pseudo joint, and you can use this contact for an extra articular distraction. These are the most severe cases where it is extremely important to have a good fixation to achieve the desired results. So according to his technique, he jams the spacer between the occiput and the C1, uses the spacer as a fulcrum to rotate the occiput in extension. The pliability of the C1 and the anterior soft tissues, together with a strong mechanical pull of his patented implant will allow this C1C2 complex to fall back into a fairly desired position. So this really sort of sorts out all the problems of the C1C2 complex. Now, when we compare the results of the DCER and the joint jamming techniques, when the sagittal inclination is less than 160 degrees, both these studies have achieved almost a complete reduction in more than 90% of their cases. However, if the joint becomes more and more steep, then a partial reduction which improves the situation for the neurology and favors a stable fusion has been accepted by both these studies. So out of 79 patients, 3 patients had an incomplete reduction. In the joint jamming technique, 4 patients had an incomplete reduction. However, the neurology has improved in more than 95% of the cases in both these studies. The vertebral artery has not been addressed in the joint jamming technique. However, there is a mention of the vertebral artery in the DCER paper by Professor Sarath Chandra. There is a danger of the spacer slipping. This has been mentioned by Professor Sarath Chandra in one of his cases. And there is a little dermatomal C2 hyposthesia, which the patients are not really worried about. So both these techniques have proven to be fairly effective. Now, vertebral artery is an important component of this surgery. And unfortunately, both these papers have not detailed about how to chart the vertebral artery and what are the special precautions to be taken during joint manipulation, and whether the vertebral artery needs to be dissected out when the joint needs to be manipulated. So when you use a burr to drill the C1C2 joint, you can have an high riding vertebral artery, and one has to be extremely careful that you don't shave off the C2 to an extent where you actually enter into the vertebral artery foramen. The third technique, and one of the sort of latest addition to this craniovertebral surgery, is the anterior release and posterior reduction. What we mean by anterior release is that now the concept is that because of a progressive C1C2 kyphosis, the anterior soft tissues, that is the longus colli, the anterior longitudinal ligament, the facet capsule, the intra-articular fibrosis, the bony C1 arch acts as an impediment to reduction when you do it only from the posterior side. So like any other kyphosis, you need to release the concavity and then stretch the convexity to allow the reduction. So this paper was proposed by Professor Chao Wong from the Peking University in Beijing, China. In 33 patients, he did an anterior release and only a posterior stabilization. That means he did not do a joint jamming technique from behind. So if you see the sort of results of only an anterior release and posterior stabilization, you see out of 33 patients, complete reduction was achieved only in 72% and a partial reduction was achieved in 9. So this technique on paper doesn't appear to be as good as the DCER, which has been proposed by Sarath Chandra. There are additional problems of a transoral procedure, elective ventilation. In all his patients, they did a tracheostomy. There was a dysphagia in one patient. There was dysphonia, nasal regurgitation. All these problems are very typical of a transoral approach. So there have been improvisations in this anterior release. One is from our own Professor Dr. Srivastav. One is, one is by our own group headed by Dr. Kshitij Chaudhary. So in these two cases, the anterior release has been combined with posterior joint manipulation. We'll visit this paper in the next slide. To overcome the effects of a transoral surgery, a transnasal endoscopic release and a retropharyngeal release is now being advocated, so that you do not have to encounter the side effects of a transoral release. Uh, According to Dr. Srivastav, in his paper of 15 patients with rigid atlantoaxial dislocations, they could achieve a complete reduction in 13 out of 15 patients and an incomplete reduction in 2. Mind you, these are inclinations of more than 140 degrees of the C1C2 joint. So if you do an anterior release and a posterior distraction, this seems to be as good as the results that have been shown by Professor Sarat Chandra. Kshitij also in his paper of 19 patients have shown that a complete reduction was achieved in 15 and a partial reduction in 4. He included only cases which had an inclination of more than 160 degrees. So this is a paper which shows the severest form of basilar invagination, which has been reduced by an anterior release and a posterior distraction. Concerns about steep C1 have been mentioned by Professor Atul Goel, have been mentioned by Professor Sarat Chandra. And they have said that even in the posterior only technique, one has to probably settle for a partial reduction rather than trying to attempt a complete reduction. Now, last but not the least, we know that the vertebral artery can have a lot of variations, and these variations often involve either the main artery or a branch of the vertebral artery across the posterior C1C2 joint. And this needs to be documented in every case with a CT angiography. In this particular paper, they have shown that when the C1 arch is occipitalized, there is almost an 100% variation in the vertebral artery course. Most of these variations are above the C1 arch, but in the V2 area, that is wherever we are going to do the joint jamming technique, 15 out of 73 cases had an artery which was lying across the joint, and this needs to be identified. So in this particular case, one of our R cases, there was a bilateral variation. On the right side, there was a main trunk which was across the C1C2 joint. On the left side, there were tributaries across the C1C2 joint. And as you can see here, there was an accessory vertebral artery going up in the muscles, abutting the lamina, which was actually separate from the vertebral artery. So all these things have to be taken into consideration. This patient, in fact, presented with a stroke because of dissection of the vertebral artery. So the relative contraindications, as we can make out from the various debates that have been raised by these authors, is the relative contraindications are severe inclinations or fused C1-C2 joints, difficult vertebral artery anatomy is one of the 2 contraindications of doing only the joint jamming technique. A short stiff neck, restricted mouth opening, bulky neck here is an actual contraindication for doing an anterior release. So if you look at this particular patient who had come to us, short stiff neck, restricted mouth opening, almost no space in the retropharyngeal area, short stubby nose, so anterior surgery was almost ruled out. He had a congenital atlantoaxial dislocation with ankylosing spondylitis, so the neck was very, very stiff and immobile, which was actually a contraindication for the anterior approach. This patient had been operated through the posterior approach. There was an implant with an occipital plate which had given way because this was highly unstable. The implant had failed and the basilar invagination had worsened. So even in a stiff neck, the neck will creep into a kyphosis if the posterior elements are destabilized. So if you see this particular area, there was a very thin wedge of the C2, which was available between the vertebral artery above the C1 arch and below the C1 arch. And the osteotomy had to be planned between these. So instead of using a drill, which had a danger of cutting through, we used, nowadays all of us use an ultrasonic scalpel. So we used a scalpel to create a through and through chance fracture along this red line. This disengaged the portion of the C1 and the occipital condyle above, portion of the C1 and the C2 below, and allowed us to put our spacers in between the C1 C2 joint and allow us a little bit of distraction, which will improve the position for the neurological elements. This patient recovered fully and has remained stable. We could have distracted further under neuromonitoring, but the safety of the neurological elements is of utmost importance. So in conclusion, the craniocervical surgeries are dynamically evolving because there are so many components of this surgery which can be finessed more and more. There is a voluminous work from luminaries from India. You have Bihari, you have Sarat Chandra, you have Goel, you have Dr. Lahiri, you have Kshitij, you have Vishal Kundanani. They are doing voluminous amount of work from India. Every dislocation is partially reducible. So you should call it a stiff joint rather than an irreducible dislocation. And the soft tissue should be made pliable to get better and better reduction. The vertebral artery anatomy, the bony anatomy should be perfectly assessed to avoid any errors during the surgery. And our own Dr. Kshitij, in the last case, proposed to us to get a 3D printed model, which allowed us to define the vertebral artery, allowed us the way to do a virtual surgery before actually using the ultrasonic scalpel in the patient. So this helped us plan that revision surgery very well and avoid a mishap which can endanger a patient's life. So I thank you for this opportunity for allowing me to present the work of very senior and esteemed authors. And I hope we can gather our information from these papers and improve our knowledge of craniovertebral junctions. Thank you.